In the summer of 1944, American tank crews pushing through the hedgerows of Normandy were passing along a warning that appeared in no training manual they had seen back home. If you knock out a German Tiger, do not be the first man to open its hatch. On the surface, the advice made no sense. The tank was dead. The crew was gone. The battle had moved on. At least, that is what everyone thought. Because across the Western Front, soldiers were learning that a silent tiger could still kill, and the hatch was exactly where it happened. Tunisia, February 1943. American forces fighting their first major campaign against the German army came face to face with a machine they had only heard rumors about. The Tiger weighed around 57 tons, carried frontal armor roughly 4 inches thick, and mounted the 88mm gun, a weapon originally built to knock bombers out of the sky. When it was turned against tanks, the results were devastating. American crews in Tunisia watched their own shells strike a Tiger's front plate and bounce away into the dust. Then they watched the Tiger answer from ranges where their own guns could not reliably reply. The psychological effect ran deeper than the technical one. After Tunisia, and again in Italy and Normandy, the Tiger grew into something larger than a vehicle. Allied intelligence officers noted that troops began reporting nearly every German tank they saw as a Tiger, even though the majority were smaller Panzer IVs and Panthers. Historians would later describe the phenomenon as Tiger fear, a reputation so heavy that the mere rumor of one operating in a sector could slow an advance. Understanding that fear matters because everything that follows in this story grew out of it. When American soldiers finally stood next to a knocked-out Tiger, they were not standing next to scrap metal. They were standing next to the monster of the entire Western Front, finally silent, and the temptation to climb up and look inside was almost irresistible. The first problem was brutally simple. A stopped Tiger was not necessarily a dead Tiger. The vehicle was notoriously over-engineered, and a large share of the Tigers lost in the West were abandoned after mechanical breakdowns, thrown tracks, or fuel shortages rather than destroyed in combat. A Tiger sitting motionless in a Norman field might have a dead engine and a fully functional main gun. It might have a damaged turret and a working hull machine gun. American tankers learned through hard experience that a hit which stopped a German tank had not necessarily finished it, and the practice that emerged in armored units was blunt. Keep firing into a stopped enemy tank until it visibly burned. Veterans of the campaign described putting round after round into Panthers and Tigers that showed no flame, because a tank that was not burning was a tank that might still be fighting. There was a grim irony buried in that habit. The same thick armor that made the Tiger so feared in battle also made it uniquely difficult to confirm as dead. A Sherman that took a solid hit usually showed it. A Tiger could absorb strikes that gouged its plate without ever letting the enemy know whether anyone inside was still alive. Which brings us to the second danger, the one that veterans spoke about in lower voices. Sometimes there were still men inside. A shell that failed to penetrate could still fill a Tiger's fighting compartment with spalling fragments, smoke and concussion, wounding some crewmen and leaving others stunned but alive and armed. Veteran accounts from the European campaign describe German crews who stayed motionless inside disabled vehicles for hours, waiting for darkness, either to escape on foot or to hold the tank until recovery teams arrived. And German recovery doctrine made that patience worthwhile. Tigers were so valuable and so difficult to replace that crews were under real pressure to bring disabled vehicles back, and night recovery of tanks left on the battlefield was an established practice. To an American infantryman, that created a nightmare scenario that had nothing to do with armor thickness. A man who climbed onto a silent Tiger and hauled open the commander's cupola could find himself staring down into the compartment at arm's length from a soldier holding a pistol. He would be the first to die, and the men standing on the hull beside him would be next. Reports of exactly this kind of encounter circulated through units faster than any official bulletin could have spread them. The lesson traveled with them. The hatch belonged to whoever was inside until proven otherwise. But the danger that turned informal caution into standing instruction was not a living enemy at all. It was what retreating Germans left behind. As the German army fell back through France and later toward its own border, its engineers practiced systematic booby-trapping. and the doctrine behind it was explicit. Deny the enemy anything useful and make his curiosity expensive. Abandoned vehicles were among the most reliable bait on the battlefield, and a knocked-out tiger was the most tempting object an American soldier was ever likely to approach. The methods were simple and vicious. A stick grenade wedged against the inner rim of a hatch with its pin pulled, held safe only by the weight of the closed cover. A pull igniter wired to a hatch handle, a breech cover, or the strap of a pair of binoculars left in plain view on the commander's seat. A prepared charge in the ammunition racks, fused to the first disturbance. Allied training films and ordnance bulletins from the period warned troops in blunt language about exactly this, and the warnings kept returning to one theme: souvenirs. American soldiers hunted trophies relentlessly, and everyone knew it, including the Germans. Lugers, dress daggers, flags, and optics pulled from enemy vehicles were currency in every rifle company. The Germans rigged their traps to that appetite. The man who lifted the hatch first was not just opening a tank. He was completing a circuit that had been built specifically for him. If you find this kind of buried battlefield history worth your time, subscribe to Untold War Archives. Every week, we open one more of these forgotten rules and follow it back to the reason it existed. By late 1944, the warnings had another layer, and this one had nothing to do with the enemy. It came from the tank itself. A Tiger carried dozens of main gun rounds, thousands of machine gun cartridges, and hundreds of liters of fuel, all packed into a sealed steel box. A penetrating hit could start fires that never showed a visible flame, interiors smoldering slowly in the oxygen-starved compartment for hours. Opening a hatch changed that in an instant. Fresh air rushing into a smoldering fighting compartment could turn a quiet wreck into a blowtorch, and ammunition heated by lingering fires could cook off long after the shooting had stopped, sending shell fragments and the hatch covers themselves into anyone standing on the hull. Ordnance personnel understood this, which is why the men whose job was to examine wrecked armor treated even a cold-looking vehicle as live until it had been ventilated and cleared. The infantryman with a flashlight and a free afternoon understood none of it. To him, the tank was a curiosity. To the men who wrote the safety bulletins, it was 57 tons of unexploded ordnance with a door on top. And there was one final reason the hatch was supposed to stay shut, one that had nothing to do with survival. An intact Tiger was an intelligence prize of the highest order. In April 1943, British forces in Tunisia captured a Tiger that would become famous under its turret number, Tiger 131, disabled by a shell strike that jammed its turret and abandoned by its crew. The vehicle was recovered nearly complete, shipped to Britain, and pulled apart by engineers who documented its armor, its optics, and its gun in exhaustive detail. Winston Churchill and King George VI personally inspected it in North Africa. That single captured tank shaped Allied understanding of what they were facing for the rest of the war. American ordnance and technical intelligence teams ran the same race on their own front, and they needed enemy vehicles undisturbed. A souvenir hunter who stripped the radios, rifled the stowage, and dropped a match into the fighting compartment was not just risking his own life. He was burning intelligence the army badly wanted. So the instruction that filtered down to the line carried a quiet institutional weight behind it. Leave the hatches alone. The specialists get there first. Out of all of this, a procedure took shape, unwritten in some units and posted in others, but recognizable everywhere by the end of 1944. A German tank that stopped moving received more fire, not less, until it burned or its crew visibly abandoned it. Infantry approaching a silent Tiger raked the hatches and vision ports with machine gun fire before anyone came within grenade range. Then came the hardest part for tired, curious men. Waiting. Waiting for the wreck to cool, waiting for engineers, waiting for the ordnance team with the mine detectors. When a hatch finally had to be opened and no specialist was available, the field expedient method was the one bomb disposal men had taught since North Africa. A rope or a length of wire hooked to the hatch handle, paid out to a man lying behind cover, and a long, slow pull from 30 feet away. If the hatch came up and nothing happened, you counted to 10 and pulled again. Only then, only after steel, fire, and silence had all been given their chance, did anyone look inside. It was slow. It felt absurd next to a machine that was obviously dead. And it kept working, which is why it survived every rotation of replacements who arrived thinking the war's rules were exaggerated. What waited inside those tigers explains the rest. Sometimes it was nothing, an empty compartment and open escape hatches, the crew long gone into the hedgerows. Sometimes it was the crew, or what fire had left of them, 5 men fused into the machine they had been told was invincible. According to accounts from the men who cleared these wrecks, that sight ended more souvenir hunting than any bulletin ever printed. And sometimes, for the units that had ignored the warnings, the tank claimed one more name for the casualty rolls days after its last shot, a soldier killed by a wire he never saw in a battle that was already over. The warning about the tiger's hatch was never really about the tiger. It was one rule inside a larger truth that every soldier in Northwest Europe eventually absorbed. By 1944, nothing on that battlefield could be trusted at face value. Not a dead tank, not an open door, not a pistol lying in the grass. The same pattern produced the warnings about picking up enemy weapons, about entering abandoned dugouts, about touching the bodies of the fallen. War had turned ordinary curiosity into a weapon that pointed backward, and the armies that survived were the ones that learned to treat their own instincts as the enemy's ally. The tiger's hatch stayed shut not because of what the tank was, but because of what the war had become. A place where the most dangerous moment was not the fight itself. It was the silence that came after.